Karen's not out. Oh, there she is.
Okay.
I didn't know if she
All right, we're back. The appearances are as before with the jury upstairs, and they have notified us they have reached a verdict. Anything before we call the jury down?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Oh, yeah, bring them up.
We didn't want to do it until we called for the other one.
Correct. Right, bring them in first.
Okay, so call, text him, we can bring him down.
Yeah.
And I'll set them up over there. Is the TV going to be in their way?
Remove it. Just shove it aside.
Yeah, just
Yeah, you folks can be seated maybe a few minutes while we... What's that? No, we haven't.
you don't want anybody standing either, correct?
There's no standing room. No, there's no standing room. And us,
Yep.
any of the other judges are welcome. That's the only exception. By the way, reaction at all, no matter how strongly you may feel. And it's understood that many people do have strong feelings. But, we can't permit any kind of a reaction to the verdict. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of law enforcement here, and you will be whisked out of here if there is any. So just be aware.
Hello?
Would you come down, please?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, members of the jury, have you elected a foreperson? Would you give your juror number, please?
54.
54. And has the jury reached a verdict as to each count of the information?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
One verdict and one verdict only.
Yes.
Would you hand all of the paperwork to the bailiff, please?
This is the ones that you did. Okay.
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. May I see that too, please, Mrs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chairman? Thank you. The defendant will rise and face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled?
No.
Okay. Okay, folks, your job is done, and we started just about 3 weeks ago. And I told you it could last 2 weeks and 2 days. This is 2 weeks. This is 3 weeks. You were a wonderful jury to work with. You were punctual. You were attentive. And the forgotten six over here who had a very difficult job of keeping from discussing the case during the time that they were sequestered as well. All of you, I couldn't have asked for a better jury to work with. And it has truly been my pleasure. I think, without commenting on the verdicts themselves, just in terms of your attentiveness and cooperation that you gave to us, justifies confidence that the founders of our country placed in you. So, I dismiss you at this time. You're never under any obligation to discuss any aspect of this case with anyone. You're welcome to do so as little or as much as you want. The media have requested, a number of media sources have requested to talk to you, and we present presentations to you that you'll get in writing, and it's entirely up to you whether you want to contact them. They are not to contact you. If anyone does contact you, and just tell them you're not interested in discussing it, if that's the case. And if anyone persists in doing so, report that to us and it will be addressed. At the beginning of the trial, there was some concern about information and your safety. And I assure you that we will take every measure to ensure that is your concerns are addressed and respected. And I'm going to talk to you for just a minute, not about anything to do with the case, but about that sole issue. And as I say, you're welcome to discuss the case as little or as much as you want. Any questions, anybody? Thank you so much. And you're after 4 years, you're eligible for service again. It would be my honor with you. Thank you.
Judge, can you have them all go back upstairs?
Yeah, please. Or in the they can attend the library. It's not going to be more than a minute, or maybe it will be.
Well,
Yeah, take them upstairs. That's fine.
paperwork to-
That's fine. Mr. Richards,
Your Honor, I have the judgment on the verdicts.
any word from the state?
The jury has represented our community in this trial and has spoken.
All right, the motion of the defendant is granted. The charges against the defendant on all counts are dismissed with prejudice. He is released from the obligation of his time. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Good day.
Kyle Rittenhouse convicted, if not on all counts, at least on something. He spoke to the uncle of Jacob Blake this morning and headed into court, and he seemed confident that Kyle Rittenhouse might be convicted on something. Well, that is now not the case, and as that verdict was read, there were also pickup trucks that started the block here in front of the courthouse. Somebody just drove by yelling very loudly out the window, "Free Kyle, Kenosha is safe." So it is possible we could see some contentious moments out here outside the courthouse. This is, of course, where all of that contentious activity began in the August of 2020 following the shooting of Jacob Blake. So there are people in Kenosha who are very worried that this could be revisited all over again, that perhaps the city could devolve into chaos. But for the last few minutes, it has also been quiet out here. I think people are kind of trying to take in that verdict. I think people somewhat suspected, after more than 25 hours of jury deliberations and the option of convicting Kyle Rittenhouse on lesser included charges, some sort of compromise, people seem to be of the mindset that something might come of that. To see Kyle Rittenhouse acquitted on all 5 charges is certainly not something the crowd outside the courthouse was entirely expecting. So what happens now, it will be difficult to see. There's a lot of security inside the courthouse. The governor has put 500 members of the National Guard on standby in and around Kenosha. Some of them are staying in hotels nearby. Business owners are certainly hoping that the town remains calm, but how that unfolds over the next few hours, we will certainly have to wait and see. I've also been told by Rittenhouse's defense team that regardless of the outcome, the defendant was going to be taken out of the courthouse. The defense team was going to be taken out of the courthouse and immediately taken off site, so there was no security threat to them or to the courthouse. So that's sort of the sense that we're getting out here. It's very much a wait and see attitude about where things go in the next few hours.
Liz, really appreciate it. Liz has been on this case from the very beginning. You can tell Liz's picture right there behind her. There is a crowd gathered on the steps of the courthouse. We also have a camera there, and microphone is up. Let's listen into some of the community reaction right now.
Amendment to right for freedom of speech and social justice. Let freedom ring. Yes. Surprised by the decision? I am surprised. I'm not just surprised. It's an insult to the process of criminal justice. It's an insult to know all of the things that were done to give this defendant an advantage. A $2 million legal defense fund. People like the McCluskeys from St. Louis, who practice the same behavior by pulling their weapon for no reason on peaceful protesters. This is disturbing at best, and it is unacceptable at the highest level.
Justin, how surprised were you when the verdict came back? What were you expecting would happen?
I'm not so surprised, because in this city, my nephew was shot 7 times in the back, and no charges were ever leveled. You have to understand, from day one, the judge had his hand on the scale. He didn't allow pictures, he didn't allow videotapes, and he didn't allow getting allowed. He was doing everything he could to allow this young man in his courtroom clear and free. It put blind over the eyes of the jurors, and maybe because he did that, they didn't see the evidence how they would have seen it. They said, I think if you young man say, I can't wait to shoot somebody 30 or 40 days, and 30 days later, you murder 2 people with that exact same weapon that you would have? How can you be mad? This young man drinks, eats, and sleeps the rhetoric of Proud Boys, the Ku Klux Klan, and skinheads, talk about hurting African Americans and minorities all the time. He merely acted it out. What came to address you was racist as government, the police, and everything that was involved in this case that did not ring tones playing from Trump. The judge said he doesn't like rallies, he calls them rioters. There's a big difference. So this was not a true, accurate carry of justice, led to this young man getting away because of it.
The uncle of Jacob Blake speaking about what he calls an injustice. He's been outspoken, talking about his nephew was shot by police, led those protests in Kenosha, clearly disagreeing with today's verdict.
You can tell the crowd right there gathered on the steps of the courthouse, along with throngs of media, of course, not getting reaction. If you're just joining us, we are on breaking news coverage right now. Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all counts by the jury. We do have our legal analyst, Gil Sofer, always on standby for us, has been this in time that the jury has been in deliberations. Gil, are you with us right now?
I'm with you, yeah.
Well, first of all, your reaction to the verdict.
Well, I'm not surprised, I suppose, if it had been a day after they started deliberating rather than 3. But the reality is the defense had the better side of the case as the evidence was coming in. So I'm not shocked.
Do you read anything? I know, prosecutors and attorneys always say that we don't read into it, but we are going to ask you nonetheless. But read into anything about the fact that the jury really didn't have many questions for the judge during their deliberation process.
I don't think there's too much to be read into that. The reality is the case, while very fraught and very contentious, obviously, was also fairly simple. It really boiled down to the videos, and we know they asked to watch those, and that they did, and they spent a fair amount of time doing that. So I'm not surprised there weren't many questions. It really came down to, was this self-defense under the law, or was it not?
Gil, this really, earlier this week, between the defense and the prosecution and the judge, we got to listen to them discuss some drone video. The defense said they were not properly provided. What do you see the prosecution doing now? Is there a possibility they review some of the court proceedings and have issues with that? I guess the question, Gil, is what happens next for this, obviously, as Kyle Rittenhouse is free?
Well, this case is over. So once the prosecution loses a case, they've lost the case. There's nowhere else to go. And you heard the prosecutor at the end say, we accept the verdict. The jury has spoken. He has no choice. Double jeopardy is attached. His criminal exposure is over. His civil exposure is not. I'd full expect to see civil lawsuits brought against him, and some already have been.
And Gil, talk to us a little bit about the process, right? So the verdict has been read. Kyle Rittenhouse, obviously a free man. What happened to that jury pool? Are they, at this point, escorted out of the courthouse?
Yes, they'll be given protection as they leave the courthouse, and they'll try to do it in as unobtrusive and protected a way as they can, but they're free to go, and they're on their way home. And Kyle Rittenhouse is indeed a free man.
Defense has said, both the defense and the prosecution said they will not address the media at the courthouse. We've got to expect some reaction or some statement, I would think, from both of them. Do you anticipate the defense attorneys coming out and praising the jury for its decision?
I think they likely will. That's the typical play after an acquittal like this. I'm sure that they will. I'm sure that they will talk about the experience and how happy they are for their client.
And I just wanted to ask you to wait in just a little bit. You have so many trials and so many jurors. This is an awesome responsibility on those jurors who sat in this case deliberating for 3 full days. Just talk to us a little bit their mindset through the process. I mean, obviously not individually with any particular.
It is an awesome responsibility. And what I think is always striking about our process in this country is how seriously jurors take it. They know the consequences of their decision. In a case like this, the consequences go beyond just the defendant. They go to what's happening in the streets and what could happen in the streets. And they know that. But they work through it very carefully. And after 3+ days, in this case, I think we've seen that. The issues weren't terribly complex. They took a lot of time working through them. They take it very seriously.
Gil Sofer, our ABC7 legal analyst, please stay with us because we like to lean on you for some of your legal expertise. We appreciate you kind of sorting what's next out and just describing some of the things from your perspective. We really appreciate it. Our team coverage continues, though. We also have Mark Rivera, who's up outside the Kenosha County Courthouse. We want to check in with Mark. We heard Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, speaking. Just want to get your perspective. Did you hear that, and what else are you hearing, Mark?
All right. Well, as you can hear behind me, there are some claps right now as well. Right now, it really is the coin of elation and anguish. Jacob Blake's family, Justin Blake, his uncle right there, saying that this is not justice served. Members of the Rainbow Push Coalition who are here as well saying this was a miscarriage of justice. Meanwhile, you have Kyle Rittenhouse supporters who've also been out here since the trial began, who are celebrating at this moment, saying that this was the right verdict. Obviously, both sides of this were very, very passionate about this during the entire case, and we're seeing that play out as well right now. Obviously, the family members of Jacob Blake extremely disappointed at the verdict now, while we have people from all over the country who have flown in as supporting Kyle Rittenhouse, who are very, very happy at this moment. Rob, Judy.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. And while we are here, I just wanted to read the statement that was put out by the governor. This is prior to the verdict coming in, talking about the reaction of the crowd potentially after a verdict. Governor Evers saying that the Kenosha community has been strong and resilient, has come together through incredibly difficult times these past 2 years, and the healing is still ongoing right now, saying that he's urging folks who are otherwise not from the area to please respect the community by reconsidering any plans to travel there, and encouraging those who might choose to assemble and exercise their First Amendment rights to do so safely and peacefully.
We've not heard from the defense about this decision or the prosecution. They had said leave the courthouse. Kyle Rittenhouse will also leave the courthouse after being found not guilty on all counts. The judge taking some time, and if you're just joining us, or if you saw this earlier, Judge Schrader praising this jury, saying they did a good job in terms of following the guidelines provided by the court, following all the proper procedures. And you heard it was juror number 54. We got some of the questions they asked early, and you'd asked that Gil Sofer that they had not asked too many, but we got to see the copies, and they were signed juror 54, who sounded like a woman, so that was the foreman who read all these charges. And then the judge told them, you don't have to talk to the media. Yeah. If they contact you, you can say no. So it will be interesting to see if they want to speak publicly about this, or if they just remain anonymous, as is their right in any case with a jury.
Right now we're going to go back to Liz Nicky, who has been covering this trial for us from the very beginning. She is standing live outside the courthouse. Liz.
And Judy, you've been talking about jurors and their awesome responsibility here and how seriously they appeared to have taken this case, deliberating for more than 25 hours and ultimately coming to that conclusion that Kyle Rittenhouse should be acquitted on all 5 counts against him. Well, this trial began 3 weeks ago with jury selection, and they went through more than 80 people in the courtroom trying to very specifically jurors to sit on this case. The judge repeatedly told them, as he was just doing there, how important this civic responsibility is and how important they needed to take it to base their decision strictly on the evidence they saw presented to them in court, both in the form of witness testimony and in the form of video. We watched hours of live stream video over the course of this case, and on several of the days when I was in the courtroom, jurors appeared to be taking copious notes, paying very close attention, looking at what prosecuting defense attorneys asked them to look at when Kyle Rittenhouse himself testified. Some of them appeared to look at him with some empathy as he cross-stand and got emotional during that testimony. But just to revisit all of this, we want to take you back and allow him to read that verdict again. That was just a few minutes after more than 25 hours of deliberations. 12 jurors, 7 women and 5 men reached this decision here in the Kenosha County Courthouse.
Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we the jury the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth of the information, Anthony Huber, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. The fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
There you go. All five counts against Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty. Those counts that were presented to jurors to this first-degree reckless homicide for the shooting and killing of Joseph Rosenbaum, first-degree endangering the safety of Richie McGinnis, a video online photographer who was just feet away when Kyle Rittenhouse fired those first fatal shots that night of August 25th, 2020. The third count, also first-degree recklessly endangering the safety of another man who the prosecution had claimed was trying to stop Kyle Rittenhouse from firing again, trying to knock that gun out of his hand. The fourth count, which was the most severe against Kyle Rittenhouse, first-degree intentional homicide. That was for the death of Anthony Huber, the man who swung his skateboard at Kyle Rittenhouse as he ran down Sheridan Road, trying to stop him. His girlfriend says from firing again. Kyle Rittenhouse was also guilty on that charge and attempted first-degree intentional for shooting Gage Grosskreutz. Now, Grosskreutz was the only survivor that was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse that night, and we did hear from him personally in the courthouse. But clearly, even after hearing from Gage Grosskreutz himself, jurors felt that Kyle Rittenhouse should be found not guilty of trying to kill him. Rob and Judy.
Okay, Liz, thank you. We see behind you, and we want to take a camera that we have right there. This is family of the men shot by Kyle Rittenhouse leaving the courtroom. They were inside as that verdict was read. We had another reporter inside who said they started crying as that verdict was read. Kyle Rittenhouse's mom started crying, and we saw an angle as Liz replayed that for us. As the final count of not guilty was read, you saw Kyle Rittenhouse collapse.
Yeah, you did see that on camera, and a very emotional reaction to the not guilty verdict. Our Liz Nagy, who has been on this story from the beginning, also spoke during this process with some family members of the men that were shot by Kyle Rittenhouse, and they were telling her, Liz is standing by right there, they were telling her how exhausting this process has been, of course, every day coming in, obviously during the trial as well, but also every day waking up, waiting for this verdict to happen. We also, again, we have many crews standing by outside of the courthouse. Mark Rivera is also right there on the ground. I wonder if we can bring him back in and give us a sense of just how large this crowd is right there outside of the courthouse, and what kind of police presence are you seeing right now? Mark, are you with us? Can you hear us?
I'm with you right now. We are seeing a large sheriff's presence right now as aunt and girlfriend of Anthony Huber are walking now to their car, taking in the results of the verdict. We're in the scrum right now with tons of media as we are walking on the side of the courthouse, and they're going back to their cars, obviously taking it all in at this moment, and honestly quite shell-shocked, it seems.
Have they said anything, Mark?
I know this is no, they have not said anything so far as they walked out. Very quiet and looking very sad, quite honestly. Obviously not the verdict they were expecting at this moment as they make their way out of the courthouse. We've been dealing with a lot of passionate energies here the last few days. People on both sides in front of the courthouse protesting since the trial began. And this is what the result at this moment, a huge sheriff's presence walking these two relatives of a man who was killed by Kyle Rittenhouse back to their home, back to their cars and their homes, walking out of court today with a result that they were not expecting.
And Mark, I know you said that you're right.
Rob?
Mark, I know you are right in the middle of that, and sometimes it is a little more difficult to see just how large this crowd is. Do you have a sense right now how large this crowd is? Is it growing as we continue this coverage right now?
Crowd right now doesn't seem to be growing at this point. There were maybe 24 people in front of the courthouse this morning, and much more media than that. You know, obviously the eyes of the world on Kenosha at this very moment, but we're trying to get around to the front here so we can get a sense of what's going on. Obviously things will potentially change as the hours move on. Right now, though, we have not seen a large increase in the crowd outside of the courthouse, though.
Oh, right. There's our camera moving. Mark says this is the great aunt and girlfriend of Anthony Huber, one of two men shot and killed by Kyle Rittenhouse. Let's see if we can hear if she's saying anything.
Behind you. Pull.
She's remained. This is a slow walk because there's just so much media, and you see her being escorted by the sheriff's department and police officers as they slowly make their way to their vehicle or wherever they're going, but not saying much. And as Mark said they're pretty stunned by the verdict. They were in the courtroom, and our court reporter inside said they were weeping, holding hands as the verdict was read. We saw Kyle Rittenhouse's mom also weeping, and then Rittenhouse, as that last count was read, had trouble with his emotions.
And as we heard inside the courtroom just before the verdict was read, as you can understand, so many family members in there, the judge did instruct everybody in the courtroom that they can't have a big reaction to the verdict, that they would be escorted out if there is an outburst of any reaction. Certainly there were quiet tears from family members, but for the most part, everybody listened to the judge's instructions as that verdict was read. Again, if you are just joining us this afternoon, we broke in maybe about half an hour ago now with our coverage with this breaking news this afternoon. After 3 full days of deliberations, this was the start of the 4th day of deliberations. Just before noon, we got word that the jury had reached a verdict. Soon thereafter, there actually wasn't there wasn't a lot of time between we got word that the jury had reached the verdict before that verdict was read and both parties assembled. Should we listen in right now? I believe she may be speaking.
We do need to follow him, though. Watch out.
Okay, I think it's just some instructions for the sheriff's deputy right there. But really, there wasn't a whole lot of time that lapsed between us learning that there is a verdict reached and the time the verdict was both sides, of course, assembling back into the courtroom, waiting for the jury to come in. And yes, the verdict came back not guilty on all 5 charges against Kyle Rittenhouse.
We're getting some reaction now. This is coming in a statement from Karen Bloom and John Huber in response to this verdict. This is the Huber family, Anthony Huber. I want to read some of this to you. It says, "We are heartbroken and angry that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted in his criminal trial for the murder of our son, Anthony Huber." So this is Anthony Huber's parents. "There was no justice today for Anthony or for Mr. Rittenhouse's other victims." Now, these are Anthony Huber's parents' words, calling Mr. Rittenhouse's others Joseph Rosenbaum and Gage Grosskreutz. "We did not attend because we could not bear to sit in a courtroom and watch videos of our son's murder." Again, this is Anthony's parents in a statement. "And because we have been subjected to many hurtful and nasty comments in the past year, but we watched the trial closely, hoping it would bring us closure." We had not seen them at the courtroom, and now we understand why they're saying they decided to not go to the courtroom. That statement continues, and we'll share more with you about that in the coming minutes here. Mentioning the jury, last night it was curious. Our legal team heard them asked to take the jury instructions home. It was 36 pages, a pretty long jury instructions form, and that's when people started to speculate, okay, maybe, that was a weird request to our legal experts, and the judge granted it. So these jurors were able to take those instructions home last night, and it seemed as if they were checking and making. They took this, as Gil said, very serious. Most juries, when it comes to such serious charges, Gil said, they do their jobs as they're supposed to.
If Gil is still with us on that question, I ask him about those jury instructions. 36 pages as we're covering. So Gil is still with us. Gil, if we can bring you back in and just talk to us a little bit. I guess we're backtracking a little bit here, but getting your perspective on that 36 pages of the jury instruction that Rob was talking about. Is that unusually long?
It is a bit long, especially in a case that only has 5 counts and is about essentially 1 episode. But it tells us how complex the law around this was, particularly on this question of self-defense. There's a lot to be said in a jury instruction about that. And it was unusual for jurors to ask for and receive written copies of the instructions. But I think what it tells us is what we saw happen over 3 days. This jury was really serious about working its way through this evidence and the law and applying the law to the facts. I don't think there's any other conclusion to draw.
I think a lot of people would like to hear from those jurors. It will be their decision. Judge Rader told them to speak to the media, but I do think there will be a lot of people who want to hear what happened in that jury room. We can speculate on how that went, and Gil had said they certainly took this seriously, but we'll have to wait and see if we hear from them. And the defense team and the prosecution. Right now, we have not heard.
We haven't had any reaction so far. And our crews again are standing by for all of that. We also, of course, have our our investigative reporter Chuck has been on this case from the very beginning. At quote, and bring in Chuck right now and take your perspective. Verdict today, Chuck.
Judy, what we know for certain is that this was a total and complete victory for Rittenhouse and for his defense team. What we don't know what in the jury room, and we won't know that potentially ever unless one or more of these jurors decide to talk about it. What it does seem has happened there is that it was not a unanimous decision from the get-go. It took 24 hours of deliberations over several days, in all likelihood, to try to bring some who were holdouts over to the side of acquittal. I think Gil can talk about that. You don't have 5 counts decided over such a long period of time if everybody is unanimous from the start.
And Chuck, you have been covering so many cases through the years. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about, because right now we are talking about it is entirely up to the jurors if they want to talk to the media or not. Apparently, from one of the court observers, when the judge was giving those instructions this afternoon, one of the jurors clearly shook her or head and said no, indicating I'm not talking to the media. But oftentimes jurors do, some of them after a verdict. Talk to us about why that happens and what is usually the motivation for a juror to speak out.
Well, there are all sorts of motivations, as many motivations, Judy, as there are. I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't happen today. It might happen tomorrow. It might be in a month or a year from now that you would hear from one or more of these jurors. They obviously have quite a story to tell, not just what it was like sitting in the courtroom and deciding the fate of this young man, but also what happened over these last few days in the jury room. Did it take convincing most of the jurors to vote for acquittal? How many jurors were actually in favor of finding him guilty on one or more charges from the moment that they sat down there? It does seem very clear to me after covering many trials over there that this was not unanimous slam dunk from the moment the jury door closed and they were in that jury room trying to decide what to do. If it was, we would have heard a verdict back within hours as opposed to days.
And Chuck, we've got 2 screens going here. I want to explain what's going on in the top right. That was Kyle Rittenhouse as the verdict was read by the jury, and that video rolled a little longer. That's the first time we saw he collapsed. And then he embraced one of his attorneys, clearly shaken up by the verdict, which is not guilty on all counts for Kyle Rittenhouse. A Chopper 7 HD also up now. You see that. So we're getting a sense of what's happening in the air. And right now, from our vantage points here, it's been about a half hour, Judy, since this verdict was read. Calm appears to be the case in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
And you can tell from that picture there is a presence with a crowd, and of course the media out there covering this story. And the sheriff's deputies have said from the very beginning, as we are waiting for this verdict, that right now they see no reason to do any road closures or curfews in anticipation of the verdict. Of course, not knowing which day it would come. It came just a short time ago here on this Friday afternoon. Our Mark Rivera is standing by live outside the courtroom with that crowd this afternoon. And now you step back a little bit, Mark. We're going to toss it out to you and give us a sense of what is going on there right now.
Yeah, Judy, a couple of raised voices, a few arguments after this verdict, but again, elation and anguish as that verdict was read. Kyle Rittenhouse's team, a huge win for them. Obviously, the jury, as you've been mentioning, took this extremely seriously and came back with not guilty on all counts. And the reaction that we've seen outside of here, the family of Jacob Blake, who was shot by Kenosha police and that set in motion the civil unrest that we saw last year that brought Kyle Rittenhouse out to Kenosha. His family is today, and this is what Justin Blake, his uncle, had to say.
Pray for their families. We need to pray for their families. We need to pray for this city. We need to pray for this county. And we need to pray for this state and this nation.
Now, we just finished walking with the family of Anthony Huber, a man shot and killed by Kyle Rittenhouse when he came here during that civil unrest last year. A great aunt and the girlfriend of Anthony Huber did not much to say as they walked out, but they looked dejected, very, very sad, walking to their vehicles on their way home. Obviously, there is a huge presence of people behind us, but of much of the media, and we are waiting to see if more people start to show up. Obviously, throughout the entire course of this trial, there have been dueling sides, even staying on either side of the courthouse steps when they're doing their chants, saying that that Kyle Rittenhouse should be found guilty or that he should be innocent and that this was self-defense. And what we've seen today is now pretty quiet out here after this verdict, but we are dealing with high emotions during this time, and we'll just have to see how that plays out in the next few hours here. Judy, Rob?
Okay, Mark, thank you. Again, Mark, one of our team standing by for us live outside the courthouse right there, and we also had a camera inside. Just so you know, we also have cameras positioned in an area where if either the prosecution or the defense attorneys want to speak, we will bring that to you. We have a camera on that as well.
Yeah, we received word earlier this week that the defense team, if it did speak, would not be on courthouse grounds, but would likely be at a different location. Well, if that whole crew were prepared for that, you would think the defense would want to talk about their client being not guilty on all counts here, but we definitely want to keep an eye on that, and when it happens, we will bring it to you. Mark talked about the great aunt and girlfriend of Anthony Huber walking out of the courtroom slowly because there was so much media and a police escort for them. They did not say much, but we have heard from Karen Bloom and John Huber. These are Anthony Huber's parents. They released a statement. I want to read a little more of that, and this is the parents' word according to a statement released. Today's verdict means there's no accountability for the person who murdered our son, sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, and then use the danger that they have created to justify shooting people in the street. And that's where the divide happens among so many people who were watching this closely, the people supporting Kyle Rittenhouse who are there at the court, and the people who support Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, obviously Jacob Blake, and then what led to those riots in Kenosha and led to this. Those were dark days and violent days up in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Yeah, this case capturing the attention of course, everybody here locally, but around the country, globally as well. We also had a chance here to the verdict coming down earlier this week to visit Kenosha and speak to some of the resident business owners there. And Michelle Gallardo was on that story, and I remember she saying that there's sort of this collective sense of just, being on edge and waiting to see what happens with this verdict. And so many of the residents in Kenosha have this, they just want it to be over with. Whatever the verdict is, they can continue to move on with a recovery process. Many in the city of Kenosha, many businesses have not recovered from what happened on that night in August of last year. So again, if you're joining us here this afternoon, we're on breaking news coverage. A short time ago, the jury of 7 women and 5 men in the Kyle Rittenhouse case coming back with a not guilty verdict on all counts here this afternoon. They began deliberations about 9:15 Tuesday morning after 3 full days of deliberations. This morning they went into the 4th morning, and now we have this verdict.
7 women and 5 men. You mentioned the community of Kenosha. These are peers. This is their community. These were the people chosen by the court to make a decision, and that decision is made. Liz, we want to go back to Nagy. She's also on the ground outside the court. You saw most of the proceedings in court, and today you're outside. Many of the people you've spoken to over the last several months about this case. What are you seeing right now?
Commotion going on around us, but now it's kind of quieted down. Something keeps echoing in my head. I spoke to a young girl who works at a business downtown, just a few blocks from this courthouse. Late last week, she said everybody is talking about this case. It's all my 15-year-old sister talks about. This has been going on here nearly 15 months now, and people just want to come to some kind of conclusion. And what she told me in the end was everybody has a feeling about it. Some people feel one way, some people feel another, but in the end, it really doesn't matter what any of us think. It's what those 12 jurors who are going to decide Kyle Rittenhouse's fate think. That was about a week ago that she told me that, and we now finally know, after a 3-week trial, that this jury believes that Kyle Rittenhouse, or believes the defense's case, they in self-defense. So we don't know yet how the community of Kenosha will react, if people will angrily protest, if there will be any of that violent looting and rioting that we saw in some of the late nights in August of 2020. But we do know that people here, whatever the outcome, did want this to be over. They wanted some sort of conclusion. Jurors also expressed trepidation when they were in jury selection, that they didn't want to have to face their family members, that they maybe thought differently than their family members. They were going to find it difficult to go home at night and not talk about the case, because that's what people in Kenosha are talking about right now. But as it happens, we had 2 jurors dismissed, and that was it. There were 12 jurors in the end who came to this conclusion, deciding that Kyle Rittenhouse should be acquitted on all 5 charges against him. One of the pivotal moments of this trial, and at the time it was unclear if it was going to be pivotal, but when Kyle Rittenhouse took the stand himself and he was questioned for several hours, he endured cross-examination from prosecutors who were trying to put him in jail for these charges. And we have some of that testimony where he repeatedly explained himself. He says he believed he fired in self-defense, and the defense was adamant about that case the entire time. This was that testimony from Kyle Rittenhouse speaking with prosecutors.
To shoot Mr. Rosenbaum. Why did you point it at him if you didn't have the intention of shooting? He was chasing me. I was alone. He threatened to kill me earlier that night. I didn't want to have to shoot him.
I just watched that video over and over again. Not the video of Kyle Rittenhouse testifying, but video of that shooting, of the encounter with Joseph Rosenbaum, which happened just about 3 blocks from this courthouse where this has all been taking place. And Kyle Rittenhouse was adamant and did not let down, that he said he believed he had to shoot and kill Joseph Rosenbaum to save his own life. Plenty of people outside this courthouse who said they did not believe his testimony that it put on. They felt that he should be convicted of these charges. But in the end, here we are. Kyle Rittenhouse has been acquitted for shooting and killing 2 men, shooting 3 of them. 1 of them survived. So how the city of Kenosha reacts to all of this, we'll just have to wait and see over the next few hours.
And Liz, I wonder if I can ask you also to give us a sense of the crowd outside, not just today, but you have been there from the very beginning. From day to day, the sense of that crowd that has been gathered outside the courthouse. Give us a sense of what that was like.
Judy, this trial to last several weeks, perhaps 2 weeks. So as we stretched into the 3rd week, that's really when you started to see crowds gathering here. Once jurors went into deliberations, that's really when things heated up and people started showing up. And Kyle Rittenhouse has there were a lot of people showing up who claimed to be supporters of the Second Amendment, who said they were here to support Kyle Rittenhouse. They believed he should be acquitted on all charges. And there were some clashes outside the courthouse. We saw several people arrested over the course of this week for having confrontations out here in front of the courthouse. Justin Blake is the only person who has been here every single day outside the courthouse, often walking back and forth with that flag you've seen him carrying, just pacing back and forth on the court steps by himself. And he has repeatedly maintained that he was going to have protests if this outcome came to be, if Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted on these charges. But he was going to say that people needed to remain peaceful, that there's still a movement that needs to move forward here, and violence is not going to solve that. So Justin Blake has really led the activist charge here in Kenosha since Jacob Blake was shot, that prompted all of these protests back in August of 2020. So for the most part, Justin Blake has been the sole protester here, but this week there were confrontations and things did get heated. And in the last hour or so since we've had that verdict, it seems there are more people out here who support Kyle Rittenhouse than people who wanted to see him acquitted, perhaps because those people are now celebrating because they feel like the outcome that they wanted came to be.
Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake. Liz, thank you for providing some insight on what's happening outside the courtroom. Chopper 7 HD also giving you another angle there. The crowd seems to have diminished since this verdict has been read. Liz, I know you'll stay there for us. We'll check in with you. I want to bring in our legal expert again, Gil Sofer, to talk a little bit about this jury. And Chuck talked about this too, Gil. People are going to want to hear, no matter what this decision was going to be, there were going to be critics of this jury. And so you wonder, Gil, how will that play out? Will, in your opinion, some speak? Do they talk together and say none of us should talk? In your experience, because they get close over time. A jury becomes close, don't they? Because they have to make such an important decision, and sometimes they make agreements among each other.
They do become close, but I think Chuck has it exactly right. They might talk today, they might talk tomorrow, it could be a month from now. It's not unusual to see jurors surface after a long stretch when they feel comfortable doing so. We have to remember this was a very charged environment. It is right now, it may be today and beyond. So I think these jurors will wait it out and see when they feel safe and secure talking to the press, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
And is it also clear to you, Chuck mentioned this as well, that you can tell by the fact that they took 3 days deliberations, 24 hours collectively in deliberations, that this was not unanimous from the very beginning, that they didn't all agree on the charges?
No, I think that's exactly right. It is normally the case that there's a straw poll, in essence, that's conducted as soon as jurors back into their jury deliberation room. What did you think? If they discover that all of them agree exactly on what the outcome should be, they will probably still take a few hours to work through the evidence, but they'll come back a lot more quickly than 3 days. I think it's likely that there was some convincing that had to be done.
Hey, Gil, I want to read you a statement. We received a statement from Karen Bloom and John Huber, the parents of Anthony Huber, and you had mentioned this case is over, obviously, but you anticipate some civil cases. And this comment that they wrote may address what you were talking about. And this is a quote from the parents of Anthony Huber. "Make no mistake, our fight to hold those responsible for Anthony's death accountable continues in full force. Neither Mr. Rittenhouse nor the Kenosha police who authorized his bloody rampage will escape justice. Anthony will have his day in court." That's according to Anthony Huber's parents. When you hear that, do you think they're speaking about civil suits? Is that what you think some of these men's families who were shot by Kyle Rittenhouse will do next?
Well, it almost certainly means civil suits. For one thing, there's really no option left on the criminal side. Certainly not in the state. That is done. Federally, there are really no charges that could be brought criminally. So they're clearly speaking about civil litigation. And by the way, some has already been brought. A case was already brought. It may not, but it was already been brought. Alleged wrongdoing, not just by Rittenhouse, but also by Kenosha authorities. So we haven't seen the end of this.
And certainly if that happens, they will be relooking at some of the evidence that was presented in this trial right now. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that drone video controversy that happened inside the courtroom. Now, that discussion, sometimes it felt like it was an argument between the two sides, and the judge, of course, presiding over it. That happened outside of the jury's presence. They were not there for that. But Gil, talk to us a little bit about your take about the controversy, that disagreement over this drone video that was sent by the prosecution to the defense.
Yeah, and first off, it's normal for there to be argument on evidence outside the jury. You simply don't want them exposed to it. That was about, as we'll remember, the quality of the video that was presented to the defense. And their argument was, Judge, it was fundamentally unfair to us. Had we seen this high-quality video presented to the jury, we would have fashioned our decision, in a different way. It doesn't matter now, of course, because there's an acquittal. And so any concerns that have been expressed by the defense, and there were others as well, remember the motions for mistrial, they've evaporated. So it just doesn't matter. And in any event, what they had been complaining about would not have been enough to terminate this trial.
Gil, what happens after a case like this? If you're on the defense team and the prosecution, what are those lawyers you think discussing right now? Do you think Kyle Rittenhouse is still with his attorneys? I'm just curious what you think in your experience each side is doing right now as we wait to hear from both of them.
Well, it's a tough day as it is for the prosecution. It's equally as wonderful a day for the defense. I'm nearly certain that Rittenhouse is with his lawyers now, just living and experiencing and reflecting on the moment. It's an enormous victory for them. It's not every day the defense wins outright in a criminal case, and that's exactly what they did here. On the prosecution side, they knew this was a possibility, of course, but it's a hard blow. It's a very hard blow, and I'm sure they're reflecting on that right now.
And speaking of the moment and reflections, we had some time to sit on the courtroom camera after we got word that a verdict has been reached, before that verdict was actually read, and the camera saw both sides sitting there basically in silence. Of course, Kyle Rittenhouse sitting there waiting. What is that moment like for an attorney from on either side?
Those are some of the longest moments of a professional lawyer's life. Waiting for the verdict is agonizing for both sides. I suppose more so for the there's more at stake for them, but it's an agonizing wait. And then when the word comes in, it's either a relief that's almost inexpressible, or, as I say, a really bitter blow. But these are some dramatic moments in a lawyer's life.
As we were speaking with you just a few minutes ago, in the other screen that we have up, we were watching Kyle Rittenhouse's reaction. When he took the stand, he became emotional. If you remember, the judge called for a 10-minute break so he could compose himself. Today, as that jury read the verdict, Kyle fell to his chair. His lawyer helped him from, it looked like he was nearly going to pass out, weeping and embracing his other lawyer. That was something we had not seen earlier. And Gil, as you mentioned, that just speaks about the emotion and involved in this case for everyone, particularly Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, it does. I mean, these are such stressful, traumatic moments. We only need to imagine what would it be like to contemplate the possibility of spending the rest of your life in jail. And you're about to hear the verdict on that question. Are you going to be a free man? You're going to spend the rest of your life behind bars. It's a remarkable moment.
Spoken to you during this trial, and we'll come back to you, Gil. We want to listen to Justin Blake. He's speaking again on the courthouse steps. Let's listen in.
For 100 years. For this to happen in 2021, it's upsetting to us, but it should be upsetting to everybody out there in the audience. This attack on these two young men that had no weapon to defend themselves of the AR-15. They chose to represent themselves and come out here to march in peace for Jacob Blake. It led to their death. So I'm distraught for their families, but I'm gonna try to suck it up and call them and support them. But we should know this will go around the world. This country can no longer say a damn thing at any international meeting about human rights.
There's a lot of people obviously not happy with the verdict. There's concern about what might happen tonight and this weekend.
It shows that America has a white law and a black law.
Things that happened here before. What's your message to people upset, protesters out on the street?
They should be. I mean, look what happened. How many cases do you need to see of Caucasian cops or other people walking out the door after murdering people that were either African American or supporting African Americans? So like Martin Luther King said, there's an uncashed check out there for us, for African descendants that we need and need like yesterday. We're going to be approaching the president to reopen the DOJ case on my nephew, Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back in front of his children, paralyzed by Shevsky and Kenosha. Unjust things that have to be righted while the Democratic Party that we have put in office.
Did you expect people who don't have good intentions that are going to go out and we don't want to see what happened last time?
Well, we ask everybody to recognize human life, to try not to hurt and harm each other. You can ask everybody to clap hands and jump rope after you continue to see African descendants murdered in the streets of America. I hope the world is watching, they know and see. There is no question. The ceiling, we've been robbed through redlining. We've been robbed through miseducation. We've been misguided every kind of which way you talk about it. That's why the young people say the whole damn system is hell. I think we saw today. Who do you know that gets to pick their own jury? Have you ever seen that before? Like, this is a game.
Is this the verdict that you expected? You've been out here all week.
Yeah, no, not at all. I thought the young man would probably get caught on a couple of charges, especially, what was that, the misuse of a weapon, reckless use of a weapon. I thought that was easy. You know, you can see him milling around the crowd, pointing the gun at several people before he shot the two and the third. I thought that was an easy one to go. We also think the jurors were misguided intentionally by the judge. By not allowing evidence of the pictures in when he was throwing up the Proud Boy sign. After that, in the bar, after these people were murdered, doing it again. A video that specifically said he was waiting and willing to shoot somebody, couldn't wait, and named the gun he was going to do it with, and less than 30, 40 days later, this occurs and 2 people are dead. This guy's guilty as hell, man. I don't know what this is, but you know the whole world's looking at Kenosha like you are racist as hell.
What went through your mind when I saw you up there looking at your phone watching that verdict come in? What went through your mind?
Shock and awe.
Shock and awe, brother.
Nobody that saw that video.
Nobody saw that video.
Heard the witnesses.
Couldn't believe that.
And saw the evidence that came out, not just in the courtroom, but prior to. If it weren't for the video, we wouldn't have seen him coddled and comforted by law enforcement. We wouldn't have seen his face. We wouldn't have known what happened that night if it weren't for the video. There's no way that you get out on bail, come up missing, and then you get risked again out in the general public. The judicial bias in this case was outrageous. And so many of us listening and hearing acquitted on all charges, shocked, disgraced, and very much disappointed. We've got to continue to organize and mobilize because we will not stop until we get equal protection under the law.
So
nobody would have been shot if Kyle Rittenhouse had been arrested at 5 o'clock on August 25th. He was on that corner right there with an AR-15 on his back. I walked up to him as I led the march and asked him, are you here to march with us in a nonviolent march? And he said, no, I'm here to protect the buildings. Now, Wisconsin law say you got to be so many feet away from the school. That's right across the street from the school. Had he been arrested, then for having a gun across the street from the school, nobody would have been killed, and it just wouldn't be here.
We saw people arrested right here, right in this area because of that very reason, being that close to a school.
I mean, that just sums it up. The mayor, the police chief, whoever was running the military people out that night were directly in cahoots with the other people that were at the bottom of the hill that they were led into, the militia. This government, the people were just saying, go home tonight, please. You got blood on your hands. This was a terrible mishandling of the night that led to a murdering of 2 people. He looked like a 13-year-old. They just asked a 40-year-old plus man yesterday that was carrying an AR-15 in front of the courthouse to hold up, stop. Do you have papers for it? How the hell did that ask a kid that looked like he was 13 years old in the midst of chaos? It was a cocktail for something to go wrong, and it was horribly wrong. And Anthony and Joe will always be our heroes. The other young man as well, Gage, I'm sorry. They deserve better. Their families deserve better. This city, county, and state, and this nation deserves better. But when the underlying guts are racism and the system through this whole system, from the judges to the police to everything, then you got, I mean, that's what you're going to get. Somehow that if they sat 12 jurors, a good call, but then it took a day to do it. So you don't know who was there, what their thoughts. Mississippi, 1947 to 52, they sat in a courtroom of people within an hour. They were eating dinner, having lemonade and chicken by dinner time.
This is so similar to so many cases we have to endure seeking justice in this criminal justice system. You know, in the Emmett Till case, the jury met for 2 hours. That head foreman said the reason why 2 hours because they had to have a cigarette break.
Right.
At a certain point, we must confront the fact that the layers of injustice in the criminal justice system must be fixed, they must be repaired, and we cannot rest until we get equal protection under the law. We must use peace, protest, civil disobedience to fight this fight. We will not fight it with violence. We'll fight it with the tools that we've got to suffer.
If you take this and think about Trayvon Martin.
Mark Rivera right there trying to ask some more follow-up questions. So you have been hearing right here from is the uncle of Jacob Blake. It was his shooting by a Kenosha police officer last year that led up to the chaos and the protests last summer in August. It was during that chaos that Kyle Rittenhouse ended up shooting and killing those two men.
We've been waiting to hear from the defense or the prosecution, and we are getting word that the defense team may speak in Racine, Wisconsin, not far from Kenosha. Our Jesse Kirsch covering that. Do we have Jesse? Can we see if we can get an update for you? We do. Okay. Jesse, tell us what you're hearing there, because we had heard the defense would not speak at the Kenosha County Court. So now you're in Racine. What are you hearing?
Yeah, we're about 10 miles, a little bit more than that, from the Kenosha County Courthouse. I just spoke with the lead defense attorney, Mark Richards. I asked him for a quick reaction as to how this has played out. He used one word: relieved. That is how the defense team is feeling right now. We know that there were security concerns, Rob, about both the defense team, the involvement with the jury, concerns about security for them as through the proceedings. And we do know, according to Mark Richards, that Kyle Rittenhouse is on his way home right now. So we are not going to hear from the acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse. We are going to hear from lead defense attorney Mark Richards. That should happen in about 20 minutes. And right now, the defense is using one word to sum things up: relieved. Rob and Judy, back to you.
Yeah, okay, so Jesse will be standing by for us on that. As soon as we get word that the defense attorney is talking, we'll come back to Jesse. Let's bring back Gil Sofer, because Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, who was just speaking on the steps of the courthouse, talked about the selection of the jury process. So let's revisit that a little bit. Clearly a point that they want to continue to address. So what happened here, and Gil, you can also add to it, there were 18 jurors who have been hearing this case. That had to be eliminated down to come down to 12 jurors. And that selection of who eventually ended up being on the jury that decided Kyle Rittenhouse's fate was a bit unusual. So talk to us about that. Kyle Rittenhouse himself, at the direction of the judge, actually selected the numbers from a drum, right?
Yes, it is unusual. I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like it before. But it's really fundamentally no different from having anybody else draw the names out of a hat or otherwise working through some random process. Let's remember what that was about. 18 jurors were seated and heard the evidence, but it's a jury of 12 that has to make the decision. The other 6 are alternates. They don't know who they are, and that's by design, because a juror to think it could be him or her so that they pay full attention. At the end of the day, as we saw, the cut is made to 12, but it is certainly unusual to have done it the way it was done here.
Now, typically, how is it done, Gil, in other courtrooms and cases that you have been on?
Well, it varies from courtroom to courtroom, but one common practice is that the lawyers know in advance who the alternates are, and they agree on who they are. The alternates don't know that they're alternates. Regulars know that they're not alternates, and after the evidence has come in, if you still have the same number of people seated as were seated initially, then the alternates are dismissed. That's a pretty common practice.
We were just looking at the video of Kyle Rittenhouse drawing those numbers out of the drum. He drew the 6 alternates, essentially deciding who the jurors would be. I wanted to ask you this earlier this week. Could he have said no to the judge and said, "I don't want to do that"?
You know, it's a good question. I'm sure that's never been tested. I think the answer is yes. The judge doesn't have the power to compel the defendant to make that selection. He obviously, that is, the judge is obviously under the view that it makes the defendant feel more connected to the process. That's fine. I'm sure he could have said no, but the reality is, if he didn't do it, someone else would do it. It's random, no matter how you select.
It was going to happen no matter what. And Judge Schrader had that this was not common. This is a Judge Schrader practice in previous cases like this. So he was following what he said was something he did in his court often. That was the way he did it.
Yeah. Also want to get. Oh, go ahead, Gil.
No, just agreeing. That's exactly right.
I also just want to get your reaction right now. So far, the first reaction we have gotten from the defense team, our reporter Kirsch is standing by in Racine. Apparently, the defense attorney, the lead attorney, will be speaking this afternoon, maybe in just about 10 minutes. But they gave each one reason so far is that they are simply relieved after all of this. I imagine you agree with that.
I don't doubt that's their reaction. Again, imagine it when they're waiting in those moments before the verdict comes back in to hear what it is. They're terrifying moments for anybody in that position, regardless of how one views the facts. And relief is about the only word I can imagine that expresses that feeling.
Let's bring our investigative reporter Chuck Gowdy back in. Our investigative team has looked at this case at length over the past year. Chuck, I want to get a sense from of what you're seeing and what you think.
Rob, for better or worse, prosecutors in Kenosha had one chance at Kyle Rittenhouse, and they lost badly. Now, that doesn't mean that he is completely out of the woods. As we've heard, there's a strong likelihood that there will be some kind of a wrongful death lawsuit, at least one civil suit that will be filed in court up there, and that he will have to defend himself in that case or somehow settle it. The other thing that comes to mind, and Gil, weigh in on this, as a former federal prosecutor, we always hear about cases like this where, regardless of what happens in the criminal case, there is a civil proceeding, a civil rights proceeding by the U.S. Justice Department. Is the fact that Rittenhouse is not a police officer take that off the table?
It doesn't take it off the table necessarily. There is an avenue by which the feds can pursue a civil case against non-police officers for conspiring to deprive somebody of the civil rights, but it's very rarely done. I wouldn't expect to see a follow-on Department of Justice investigation in this case or prosecution.
So the prosecutors had one shot. Of course, the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment prohibits them from going after him again in connection with what happened that night in August of 2020. Is it the end of the road criminally?
This is the end of the road criminally. Again, unless the U.S. Department of Justice can devise some theory and wish to pursue it against Rittenhouse, this is the end. I think it's a practical matter. His criminal jeopardy is done. The state cannot retry him, certainly.
Can he bring charges for wrongful arrest in this case, Rittenhouse?
In theory, he could, but there would be no real basis for him doing so. And I cannot imagine that he would attempt such a thing. There would be no merit to that kind of argument. But we need to recall it. He prevailed in this case because, presumably, we can't know yet, but the jury found self-defense to have existed. It doesn't mean that there were grounds to pursue him in the first instance. It means that he mounted a successful defense and the prosecution couldn't disprove it.
Gentlemen, thank you, Chuck. We always like to tap into. Oh, do you have another?
Yes,
go ahead. You have another question. We like to tap into your investigative mind.
We just should point out that prosecutors don't bring cases that they think they're going to lose. Certainly, they bring cases that they plan on winning, and they look at the evidence and think they're going to win. Just how unusual this is for the government in any case, local or federal, lose a case as badly as this one was lost.
It is unusual. Even more unusual on the federal side, but it's certainly unusual on the state side as well. The state generally wins its cases. The defense has a right to revel in its victory here. It is a solid victory for them.
Gil, one quick question. Any estimation of time from your experience before we hear about the filing of a possible civil suit?
Well, it could be any day. And again, civil suits actually have been filed already against Rittenhouse and others. And one of them, I believe, has been dropped voluntarily by the plaintiffs. Not clear why. Another may still be in existence, and there are different theories that have already been put forward in some of these cases and we're likely to see put forward in future cases, and that is it's not just Rittenhouse who's responsible, but it's the Kenosha authorities who conspired with him or permitted an environment in which this could take place, an environment of lawlessness. We've seen it, and we'll see more of it.
Gil Sofer, our ABC 7 legal analyst, Chuck Gowdy, our investigative reporter. these two gentlemen can answer any question we have.
That we throw at them.
We really appreciate Chuck getting in to provide just some questions that we may not answer, and Gil being able to provide some insight. So both of you stay with us, because we really appreciate that. Liz Nagy, and you're looking from Chopper 7 HD at the steps of the courthouse. Hard to tell what's going on. It looks like some police have surrounded something. I don't know if someone's there. Liz, can you see that? We just also want to check in with you and see what's going on there outside the courthouse. We'll try and get Liz's mic going. So Chopper 7 HD. There you go. Okay, Liz, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
There's some pushing going on.
We see a police van coming in. We see a police van coming in, and this is kind of what we saw the other day when we saw two people taken into custody for disorderly conduct and some sort of battery on the steps of the courthouse. Just moments before I started talking to you, we saw about a dozen police officers or so walk toward the front of the courthouse. It doesn't appear from where I'm standing, just about a half a block west of where this is happening, if there's any sort of shoving or anything going on. Perhaps there's a person on the ground of the house to tell, but there are deputies and police officers over in front of the courthouse sort of dealing with this scene. One thing I have noticed over the past few days is that police seem to be sort of taking a standoff approach rather than being aggressive and trying to clear people off the steps.
Liz, I'm sorry, Liz, we want to jump in here because we've got Mark Rivera a little bit closer. We've got Chopper 7 HD on the right, and then we'll be back with you, Liz. Thank you. And Mark, you're right there. The police have surrounded someone. What are you seeing?
Yes, so a woman came up just a few moments ago, very impassioned and upset with the verdict, and she apparently had some sort of seizure or medical incident and is on the ground right now. And that's when we saw about a dozen police officers come and surround the area, some sheriff's deputies as well coming from inside the courthouse. And right now they have just started a perimeter around the woman, trying to administer aid to her and see exactly what's going on at this time. There was no violence at all on the courthouse steps. It seems that someone just had a medical emergency, and they are trying to tend to that person right now, as so many people watch.
Okay, Mark, thank you. On what's going on just outside the courthouse. Let's go back to Liz Nagy, who was in the process of talking to us about what is happening right now. Hi, Liz.
Saying that police seem to have taken sort of a hands-off approach over the level, certainly, and sort of letting protesters and demonstrators gather on the courthouse steps, allow people to have their own discussions, even verbal arguments at certain times, and they've only really intervened if things tend to get physical or violent. And even then, I saw deputies sort of stepping back inside the courthouse because they really do not want to get involved and provoke anything. When all of this started back in the summer of August 2020, this courthouse was completely surrounded with at least a 6-foot fence, and that was something at the time that protesters said was sort of provoking them. Police dressed in riot gear, so we have not seen any of that. There are 500 National Guard standing by in and around the Kenosha area, but we have not seen any of them out in public. So there's not that heavily armored presence here in Kenosha because they don't want to provoke some sort of response. But to get back to the trial for a second here, because that is why people are gathered on the steps. You heard from Mark, this woman was impassioned, showed up outside the courthouse because she's very upset with the verdict, and certainly that has been the majority of the people that we have seen up until that verdict was read today. People who wanted to see Kyle Rittenhouse found guilty and sent to jail for these shootings. The only person we heard throughout the course of this trial who was actually injured in any of the shootings that happened that night was Gage Grosskreutz. He was a paramedic who does not live in Kenosha, who came here, he said, to provide medical care, just as Kyle Rittenhouse had told people that night, and he ended up in that confrontation. He was armed. He said he often went to scenes like this armed because he believes in the Second Amendment right to carry a weapon, and he says he pulled his gun because he was trying to stop Kyle Rittenhouse. So this was a bit of his testimony when he was speaking to prosecutors about that brief confrontation when he had a gun in his hand and Kyle Rittenhouse fired the shot into his bicep.
Going through your mind at this particular moment?
That I was going to die.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Gage Grosskreutz, again, is the only person who was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse that night who survived. He was called to the stand by the prosecution because the prosecution believed he could help make their case that Kyle Rittenhouse was an aggressor that night and that people were only trying to stop him because he was walking around armed with an AR-15. But during that cross-examination, you heard from Corey Sharafazi, one of Kyle Rittenhouse's defense attorneys. They were able to poke some holes in that argument because there was photo and video evidence that Gage Grosskreutz had, in fact, at least appeared in some of those photos and videos to point his gun at Kyle Rittenhouse. And we know that that was something jurors were particularly interested in because in their fifth question that they submitted to the judge, they asked to see some of that video. Gage Grosskreutz himself was live streaming that night and putting that on Facebook. So they had played that testimony, they had played that while he was testifying on the stand, and jurors wanted to go back and look at that, perhaps an indication that maybe at some point there were some jurors who were considering convicting Kyle Rittenhouse of attempting to kill Gage Grosskreutz. In the end, we know he was acquitted on that charge as well, and Gage Grosskreutz got up and talked on the stand about how he no longer had feeling in his arm. He is also involved, we talked some about civil suits, he is also involved in a civil suit now where he is asking for $10 million, but the prosecution had really hoped that Gage Grosskreutz would help drive home their case, and in the end the defense was able to poke holes in that and determine that in fact they believe Kyle Rittenhouse fired in self-defense at him.
Liz, we're getting some reaction now from the prosecution. Thank you for providing some information there. Jesse Kirsch is in Racine, Wisconsin, waiting for the defense team. Mark Richards, Kyle Rittenhouse's attorney, simply telling him they're, quote, relieved. But we're getting now a statement from prosecutor Thomas Binger. Now, Binger is the one who cross-examined Kyle Rittenhouse for hours on the stand. We're now hearing from him.
So let's go ahead and read the statement to you from, again, this is coming from the lead prosecutor, Thomas Binger, saying that the jury representing our community has rendered the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. While we are disappointed with the verdict, it must be respected. Again, coming from the lead prosecutor, we are grateful to the members of the jury for their diligent and thoughtful deliberations. The Kenosha community has endured much over the past 15 months, and yet we remain resilient and strong. We ask that the members of our community continue to express their opinions and feelings about this verdict in a civil and peaceful manner. That statement coming from the lead prosecutor in this case this afternoon.
So Thomas Binger's statement is echoing what the governor, Tony Evers, had said, which was asking for peace, even though he also authorized 500 National Guardsmen and women to be in Kenosha on standby. As Liz has mentioned, they're there. They have not been needed. But the prosecution saying they're disappointed, but also saying respect the decision. And if you don't, express your opinion in a civil and peaceful manner. People in Kenosha, Wisconsin want peace.
Yeah, and so we continue to keep an eye on what is happening here. We are now an hour and a half after the decision in this case, the verdict. We really just got word a little bit before noon that the jury had reached a verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case after three full days of deliberations. Getting that word before noon. Soon thereafter, that verdict was read in the courthouse after both sides had assembled. Right now, we have a camera, of course, you see, looking outside, looking at outside the courthouse there in Kenosha County. We have cameras in the community, and we have a camera in Racine, Wisconsin. As Rob mentioned, we're awaiting a statement from the defense attorney. Our Jesse Kirsch is there, Mark Rivera is on the ground, and Liz Nagy, who has been covering this trial from the beginning, with us as well. Eyes on the situation.
We should explain, Judy, what you're looking at from Chopper 7 HD, because you see an ambulance there, and Mark Rivera is near that scene, and he had said someone who was upset with the decision had a medical episode, and then we saw some Kenosha police officers surround, appeared to be a woman, to make sure that she had her space. So that ambulance you're seeing is a result of what we believe was some sort of medical episode on the steps of the Kenosha County Courthouse. You're watching this live with us, so we want to make sure we're kind of outlining what we're hearing from our reporters on the ground and sharing that with you, because you see it live right there, and everyone's wondering as time goes on here how people are going to react across the country, obviously in Kenosha.
Okay, well, I believe we have the defense attorney right now. Let's listen in.
It's been a long day. It's been a long 3 weeks. Very happy with the verdict. We're happy that the time, put in an incredible amount of effort. There were times we doubted the case. There were times we were confident. And to say we're relieved would be a gross misunderstatement. And Kyle is not here. He's on his way home. He wants to get on with his life. He has a huge sense of relief for what the jury did today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened. But as he said when he testified, he did not start this. And we're thankful in more ways than one that the jury finally got to hear the true story. And when I say the media, I'm talking about social media like that. The story that came out from the beginning was not the true story. And that was something that we worked to overcome in court. And we think we did that.
You said that you were both at times doubtful and confident. Did the length of the deliberation time instill more confidence, or was that instilling a little bit of worry?
No, doubt. I never predict how long a jury's going to be out, but it was the longest jury deliberation I've ever been a part of. I had an 18-hour and a 17-hour. One was a federal and one was a state case. It was torture. And this might sound like a small thing, but the judge wanted us to be within 10 minutes. Obviously, my office isn't within 10 minutes, so we had to sit in that room on the 3rd floor, and it was hell.
What did you talk about the decision to put Kyle on the stand? Was that a close call for you? Do you think that made a difference in the case?
You want the truth?
Yes.
Had to put him on. It wasn't a close call. At certain points, we wondered whether we would put him on. We did. We had a mock jury, and we did 2 different juries, one with him testifying, one without him testifying. It was substantially better when he testified, to a marked degree, and that sealed it. But in Wisconsin, if you don't put a client on the stand, you're going to lose, period.
What do you see as the crucial moment in the trial?
There were a lot. I think it's at the beginning, but when Attorney Binger gave his opening statement and said those things that Kyle chased Rosenbaum down, I don't know where that came from to this day. It was ridiculous. And that gave me something to really show and argue to a jury that this isn't fair. It's not a game. And I think that was huge. Corey, my co-counsel, and I stress the word co-counsel, he was not a second chair, was incredible. We fought over who got to cross-engage Groskowitz. He won. And he did a better job than I would have.
This case has gotten caught up in issues of racial justice, Second Amendment, self-defense. What does Kyle, what does your team want this verdict for this case?
When I took this case, I was hired by the 2 first lawyers. I'm not going to use their names. They wanted to use Kyle for a cause and something that I think was inappropriate. And I don't represent causes, I represent clients. And the only thing that ended up mattering to me was whether he was found not guilty or not.
Is that what Kyle feels as well? Is that Kyle wants, or does he?
I believe that's what he wanted. And I told him when I first met him, when he was in custody, that if he was looking for somebody to go off on a crusade, I wasn't his lawyer.
Mark, throughout the week, you said, when I caught you in between court,
I never talked to you.
That you were nervous, that, you didn't know what the heck was going on in that jury room. Looking back on, all that time waiting, nearly, 27 hours to this afternoon, can you kind of walk me through sort of those
emotions? I expected, we kind of picked amongst ourselves, our wives, our friends, my associates in the building, and I had Tuesday at 4:30, so I was way wrong. Nobody had Thursday, and there was talk today about whether we're going to deliberate on Saturday. I've never seen a jury, and I don't mean this as a but didn't have requests. We had no information that they ever fought. They were just working through the issues. And, you know, so it was the time that made me nervous. There wasn't any information coming out.
They submitted 5 questions over that whole time. They never asked to rewatch the videos, you know, beyond those 5 questions. Was that concerning or puzzling question, you know, for you?
You know, I was afraid of a compromise. You know, I know it's been reported that we asked for lesser includeds. We objected to all lesser includeds. Kyle was questioned on lesser includeds because he has to be, but that wasn't our wish. That wasn't Kyle's wish. And we, as time went on, were afraid that there would be some horse trading in the jury room. And that's what really concerned us.
Mark, you didn't physically frustrated the prosecution multiple times.
No.
How would you characterize your
I was a prosecutor. Corey was a prosecutor. And I never went after somebody like they did. And when they put on the Canary brothers, knowing that they were lying, that is the problem. This isn't, as I said in my closing argument, I'm not going to, not a game. And you're playing with an 18-year-old kid's life. And they were willing to put those guys on. Detective Howard and Detective Andrian had both interviewed them. In their police reports, said, "We know you're lying." I can't ask a question when they're on the witness stand. Of the witness can't comment on another. So they put them on. They knew they were lying. And that's garbage. And I'm thankful we're never going to have to litigate the issue regarding the drone video. But they kept saying we stipulated to it. We let it in. We agreed to let it in because we saw the quality we were given and the jury couldn't see anything. And then they're saying, well, his first lawyer had it because it was on Tucker Carlson. John Pierce never had that video. We've talked to Fox News. We've talked to Tucker Carlson show. The video that was on Tucker Carlson show started right when Rosen threw that. It did not start with the part that they showed at the beginning. It's a huge difference. That's what they built their whole case on, with that garbage photo. And, you know, maybe you don't expect everything in a trial, ever. And that program that they used and the expert from the crime lab specifically says on the company's blog, artificial intelligence enhancements are not to be used for forensic evidence. And they did it. And our research after it, it would have been the subject of a huge motion. We don't have to do it.
And you said going into this trial, you didn't want this to be about fraud. But in your opinion, what do you think this verdict says about the second one?
You know, I don't know that it says. I mean, I personally don't like people carrying AR-15s around. You know, there was so much anger and so much fear in Kenosha on August 25th that people did arm themselves. And, you know, we knew from the beginning that if you read that statute correctly, I know everybody thought I was crazy. If you read the statute correctly, he was legal in having that firearm. And obviously, once the evidence came in, the judge threw the charge. They threw the curfew. And those were things that the state wanted to, you know, kind of hang their hat on so they could argue he couldn't be there, he couldn't own the gun.
What was the first thing that Kyle Rittenhouse told you?
Thank you.
Mark, what the surviving victim looked like a kid who got caught doing something wrong, paraphrasing. So what does Kyle want the families between the kids to know about how this all played out? Because he repeatedly talked about he had no choice, but clearly they're just...
If Mr. Grewitz and some of the other people let Kyle go to the police, there would only be one individual dead. They referred to him, and I talked about it as an active shooter. Anybody can look up the death of an active shooter from the FBI, law enforcement. He didn't meet it, but the way that words are so charged, that's what they used. They wanted to paint him as that. You know, I wish nobody died. I wish I never met Kyle Rittenhouse. And I don't mean that because he was a bad guy. I just mean because this wouldn't have happened. I think he does. We've talked about it. There's been so much talk about whether the tears were genuine. All I can say is when we prepared Kyle and we worked on his testimony, there were things we couldn't talk about in my office because it got too emotional and he couldn't handle it. He's in, counseling, PTSD, so he doesn't sleep at night. Remorse, I think, manifests itself some other ways. I don't think he can ever walk out here and say that because of the situation. But I know Kyle Rittenhouse, and I know what he feels.
Mark, along those lines, where does he go from here?
He has to get on with his life the best he can. I think eventually some anonymity will come back to it. I don't think he'll continue to live in this area. I think it's too dangerous. He's had 24-hour security since this happened. We're thankful that the judge protected his address. Everybody in this case, and when I say that, I mean prosecution, defense. To me, it's scary how many death threats we've had. I was answering my phone on the way back from court in Kenosha. My office isn't that far. After the third death threat, I quit answering the phone.
And Mark, what do you say?
He had as much business being there as any of the demonstrators or the rioters. That's all I can say. I mean, there are going to be people who agree with that statement, but if we all just mind our own business a little bit, I think we'll all be better off. And it's a hard lesson to learn, but
couldn't have been said about Kyle?
It could be. He was asked to be there. He wanted to help the community, and that's the narrative that the state went with. He shouldn't have been there. He was asked there by Nick and Dominic. And the Kandiri brothers wanted security, and I'm trying to blame anyone. I wish he'd never been separated from Ryan Balch, and we wouldn't be here.
Does he ever express here to Kenosha?
I don't believe he does. I mean, if he had to do it all over again, and you said the thing is going to happen, and life is going to be put in a living hell a year, and you're going to not know if you're going to be a free man, he would say, I wouldn't go. But we can't have time.
The president was just asked about the verdict. He said, I stand by what the jury has to say. The jury system works.
And I'm not laughing at President Biden. What I'm laughing at is a friend of mine who's a lawyer said, he goes, and him and I had done a big case together 7-8 years ago, and he said, do you think this Rittenhouse is going to be bigger than that case? And I said, I do. And he said, why do you say that? And I said, I've never had a case, and I don't think I ever will, where within 2 days or 3 days or another, the president and the presidential candidate comment on it. And both of them had such different beliefs. President Biden said some things that I think are so incorrect and untrue. He's not a white supremacist. I'm glad that he at least respects the jury verdict. And if the government had any information regarding his cell phone or anything, that he'd been to any of those websites or been online doing that kind of stuff, it would have been in evidence. It wasn't. We were the individuals who released his cell phone, which couldn't be cracked by the FBI because we had nothing to hide. No, I'm not doing reruns. What's that? I'm a criminal defense attorney. I don't do civil stuff.
What would you say to a veteran criminal defense attorney? Talk about what's the one thing you learned. If you had to say the biggest takeaway from this case, what you learned.
Every case case is different, and every case has surprises. You know, I learned I could wait 24 hours for a verdict.
What about what happens to the $2 million bond?
I suspect there will be a fight over that. You know, John Pearson, who posted the bond, all of that money was raised on behalf of Kyle. Lynn would fight back. They're entitled to it. There was, using round numbers, there was $500,000, I think, came directly from Wendy Rittenhouse from money she had raised. So there's going to be a fight for that. And I'm just thankful that there will be a fight over that, because if he lost, it wouldn't have mattered.
No, Kyle had aspirations to be a first responder. That's still.
He wants to be a nurse.
What would you say your biggest takeaway is from this 25-plus hour jury deliberation? What do you think that says?
I need to be more patient.
Now that he has been acquitted, can you look back and point to a pivotal moment that was successful for you, that you think created this outcome?
Getting rid of the first two lawyers. And, you know, that might be a smart alecky comment, but I mean that. And I got my best friend, Corey, to join, who I trust. And to be able to work with somebody who you don't have to check their work, you don't worry about what they're going to be doing, you give them magic and it's done as good or better as you do yourself, it's priceless.
There's been a lot of commentary on the prosecutor's performance in this case. What would you say being up there with him every day?
You must have got here a little bit late. I've known Tom Binger for a long time. I knew him when he was a civil lawyer. I'm disappointed with some of the things he did, and I've said why.
Such as what?
Putting on the Cairi brothers when you know they're lying. Changing your prosecution, going with provocation after you see my client chased him down and shot him in the back. Calling him an active shooter when he's not. You know, this is done when the truth is reached, and I don't know that it's set up to do that, but a prosecutor is supposed to seek the truth. It's not about winning, and this case became about winning, and that's probably why it got so personal.
How about the judge? What do you say about how the judge handled the case?
You know, I've never seen so much made of so little, and that's not to pick on you guys or anything like that, but I've tried cases as a prosecutor 100 years ago in front of Judge Schrader. I've tried cases as a defense lawyer, and him and I butted heads as a defense lawyer. Judge Schrader gives you a fair trial as a defendant. You don't want him to sentence your client, okay? But in this case, we were looking for a fair trial, and if we lost, we knew what was going to happen. So it wouldn't have mattered whether it was that judge or some other judge. He's getting life in prison. I'd rather have a fair trial. I thought he gave us a fair trial. You know, just everybody got all crazy about the tumbler. Who cares? That has nothing to do with this. I mean, I've seen the tumbler used before. I've seen clerks pull things out and suspicious things happen. And I'll be real honest, we had every juror scored on a sheet, and we were devastated when those three of the 6 jurors were separated from the panel, because we thought they were 3 of our strongest jurors. And pulled their names. So it's a good system. You know, I've got a trial in front of them, you know, a big case, and maybe in that one I'll think he's unfair. He's a fair judge.
You also said something about like the future plans on rethinking positive live coverage to this extent. Given the judge on you mentioned that you guys were the law, there were threats made to you. What do you think that should be for setting precedent?
Oh no, that, you know, I think that I've never done a case that was televised gavel to gavel. I've had cases that have gotten media coverage. I was kind of, I knew this case was big. I had no idea it was going to be this big. I mean, I've gotten calls from people I haven't seen in 25 years. It's just bizarre. And I'll never be able to figure out exactly what it is that caused the incident it did. I don't think it made the attorneys act different. I don't think it made the judge act different. I suspect when everything cools down, if there's a big case in front of Judge Schrader, he'd let the cameras in.
Mark, will Kyle say anything to the crowd that's gathering down there now, or you on his behalf? We don't know that there'll be trouble, but there's people gathering. By the time we left, there were more and more people showing up. Do you think anything he might say could make things go better than they were?
I don't. The people who are going to end up causing trouble, they don't want to hear from Kyle Rittenhouse. That's, remain calm.
What do you think the wider implications of this verdict are, if any?
I don't think it's that kind of case. I mean, when you want to talk about implications and precedent and things like that, is it ever going to happen again? Is there ever going to be just a total unrest in Kenosha or some other city, and that's going to happen? I just don't see that. It was a case about self-defense. Protect oneself from, Mr. Rosenbaum. Don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he wasn't a nice person, and everybody knows why. And a lot of that didn't come in front of the jury. So I don't know that there's any broader implications. I don't want to make it bigger than it is. Maybe they should watch the trial.
I know Kyle Rittenhouse said thank you to you. You said that after the verdict was read. Can you share any more about general reaction from him or his family in that moment?
It's one of those things that anything that's said at this time is kind of meaningless. We have to take it in, reflect on it, and what's he thanking me for? And I don't mean that it's insincere, but it takes a while to process what happened. I haven't processed it. I don't think I can't answer that question. If I had to guess, and it would be a guess, I don't think they'll stay in Wisconsin. I got a trial in a week. I'm going to take a couple of days off and go to the Badger game tomorrow, which I've missed. Hopefully. I've missed a couple of Badger games because of this trial, and I'm we were afraid we weren't going to get to go because they were going to have them deliberate on Saturday, and I want to see them beat Nebraska.
Do you have any sense that they agreed to those verdicts much earlier, but maybe just took some extra time to at least leave the impression they really thought through it? It wasn't a quick, sudden decision.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I mean, there was the questions, and I think I asked to some people yesterday when they asked to call off at 4 o'clock, you could see the tenseness in those people, the jurors, at least I could have sensed, who were entering that room. And, if they wanted to quit early because I think they were tense. If there was some early verdict and they were playing all of us for fools, they're great actors and actresses. I think that was the case.
What do you think about the amount of time?
I believe so. I have clients from 30 years ago I still talk to. I get one of my oldest favorite clients. He moved out of Racine, moved to Minneapolis. He texted me congratulations. I talk to him once a month. I try to stay in touch with clients who want to stay in touch with me. I like to see him do well, and I hope that Kyle does.
Do you think that they'll keep a Kyle?
I hope so.
What do you think the amount of time that the jury took to says about how they handled it?
They took it very seriously. As I said, it's the longest jury I've ever had out. Wow. Can I go home?
Go home. Anything else we haven't asked you?
All right, that's the lead defense attorney, Mark Richards, this afternoon, speaking for the first time following the not guilty verdict today, saying that it's been a long day, a long 3 weeks, telling us that Kyle Rittenhouse is now on his way home, saying he wishes none of this had
I want to quickly mention the president. President Biden was asked about this just a few moments ago and said this, and I quote him, "I stand with what the jury has concluded. The jury system works, and we have to abide by it." That's President Biden reacting to Kyle Rittenhouse being found not guilty on all charges. Tony Thedford is a defense attorney, and he joins us. And Tony, we just had a chance to listen to Mark Richards about this. Did you have a chance to hear that? As a defense attorney, just want to get your reaction.
Yes, I heard the entire interview, and I'll say as a defense attorney, I don't know Mr. Richards, but I think what he said is exactly what I would have said had I been in his position. I think that, frankly, what he did was honorable in terms of having done his job. And more importantly, I think the piece that he said that I think most important is that he was not a part of some fade. One of my greatest concerns here is that Mr. Rittenhouse gets used by parties or political interests that want to lionize him, that want to treat this outcome as some indictment on the system in general or some sort of support of some concept of vigilantism. And I think his lawyer was extremely responsible in how he answered questions and his point of view regarding this verdict.
You heard some things that we did not know about how the defense prepared this case, including a mock jury. He said they had Kyle Rittenhouse testify in front of one mock jury and not do so, and then went on to say, in Wisconsin, if you don't put a defendant on, you're going to lose. I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I've tried cases actually representing clients in that courthouse before. And so I am familiar with that area to some extent. I believe that what Mr. Richards was saying was what is commonly believed in that region. I certainly don't take the position that in every case you must put the defendant up. I think that is a case-by-case situation. However, the sensibilities of the population there in that county and a population that would be picked for jury may tend towards wanting to hear from defendants, particularly self-defense cases. And, for me, I tend to put a defendant up in a self-defense case, that defendant's state of mind, why he did what he did, what he saw, what his perspective was. And I think that he could not have gotten this result without having put up Mr. Rittenhouse.
And Tony, as a defense attorney, as you're waiting for this verdict for the last 4 days, and you realize, and Mark Richards talked about this too, that there really wasn't a lot of questions coming from the jury, right? For the judge, for the attorneys. What do you read into that during this process as a defense attorney?
It is interesting that there were not a lot of questions, but I think that was an indication of, I think, the uniformity of this jury in terms of trying to reach this result. Generally, when questions come from the jury, they're looking to the judge for help because they're stuck. They didn't appear to be stuck here. Again, there were those requests for jury instructions, and those make sense. Those would be expected. It is the request for the jury instructions by the one juror to take home. I find that extremely peculiar and unique. I've never heard of that. And even if that requests were made by a juror, I don't think most judges would have granted that request because the jury needs to deliberate as a body, not as individuals who take off and try to figure out things for themselves. So that was a bit shocking. But in terms of length of time this jury was out, my feeling is the same as Mark Richards' feelings about this jury. I thought that if they were going to reach this result, it probably would have been done within 48 hours. The fact that this jury deliberated as long as it did, it was my belief that they were stuck on whether they would find the defendant guilty on some of the reckless counts. I did believe, though, that he would have been acquitted on the more serious counts here, and that was the result, obviously.
Defense attorney for joining us, providing some of his analysis into this case, and we heard from Mark Richards, Kyle Rittenhouse defense attorney. You mentioned you've been up in that courthouse. courthouse before. I wanted to ask, have you part of a case in front of Judge Schrader?
No, I have not. I have not. I had a case a few years ago, case, and Judge Schrader was not the judge in that case. I mentioned that, though, in terms of my sense of the sensibilities of the community. I was able to gather that a bit in the case where I represented a defendant there. And my multiple times visiting that courthouse, visiting my client in custody, and becoming familiar with the community, I can sort of see his point of view relative to having to put the defendant up. And I'll have to defer to defense counsel if he believes that in Wisconsin that's what you must do because that's where he practices.
That was a curious statement from him, Tony. What would you take on how Judge Schrader handled these proceedings? Because Mark Richard, the drum that Kyle Rittenhouse drew the alternate jurors from, that he thought that was much to do about nothing. But as you watched the trial, what was your insight on Judge Schrader? Because people were talking about him as well.
You know, I thought that he did a lot of things that I found to be peculiar. Interestingly, because this is an acquittal, there will not be an appeal here, obviously, cannot appeal a not guilty. And so there will not be appellate review of any of his behavior or actions. In terms of the drum, as Mr. Richards indicated, that is the custom there in Wisconsin. Curiously, though, he did not say that he had had experience with a client picking the names out of that drum. I thought that that was peculiar, that the client would pick the names out of that drum because it may suggest to the jury that the client has power or that the client self-selected the jury. Again, that was not the case, but we're talking about the implications. Also, in Illinois, where I obviously, we don't impanel 20 jurors and then have that 20 whittled down to the 12 who will decide the case. In fact, I would find it problematic because, as Mr. Richards indicated, you communicate to the jurors that you have, and a lawyer doing his or her job, a lot of attention to the demographics of that particular juror. And when you have 12 that you know will decide the case, and you know that at the beginning of the case, or at least at the beginning of opening statement of the case, it really whittles down or narrows down the communication that you would use to that jury. If you don't know who your 12 will be until it's time for them to deliberate, I think it would put lawyers at a disadvantage. However, if that is the custom in Wisconsin, Mr. Richards was obviously, and the prosecutors, of course, were obviously in a position and prepared to, argue to a jury that had essentially been decided shortly before they began their deliberation. So I found that to be very unique, but again, that is the custom in Wisconsin. And I do understand that in Michigan, that they have a similar process in terms of, this random selection of jurors or whittling down of a jury to the 12 who will deliberate the case. So I found those things to be quite unique and different from what we do here in Illinois.
And Tony, I wonder if you can also give us a little bit of insight as a defense attorney, the conversations you would be having with your client, right? The 3 days that you're waiting for the verdict to come down and talking about the options once that verdict is read. And clearly very different if he has been found guilty in terms of the sentencing and what happens to your client then versus being found not guilty and walking away. Well, what is that conversation like?
It is excruciating waiting for a jury verdict if I'm waiting for hours. I can't imagine waiting for 4 days and being embedded with my client having to wait because, again, the client would be asking me questions throughout. What does this mean? What does that mean? What does it mean that you have to, come back the next day? And frankly, we have certain assumptions that we make as lawyers about what it means for a particular period of time. But I frankly would like to echo Mark Richards. He had an assumption about how long he believed it would take. He likely communicated that to his client. When they passed those sort of predictions in terms of time, I can imagine that it was excruciating for the lawyer, obviously excruciating for any client who's waiting for a verdict. But certainly in this case, with such a long deliberation, 4 days is incredibly long for deliberations. In any case, even a case that took, 2 weeks essentially for the evidence to come in. I think that at this point, One might assume, of course, that the client is extremely relieved and happy and all of those things, but the lawyer is exhausted and happy that they reached this result because they don't have to write an appeal. So I think that is probably going to be, or probably is, the posture of the lawyer and his client.
Mark Richards said he knows Tom Binger, the prosecutor, and mentioned when someone asked how he handled this case that he was disappointed in that a few of the witnesses he called, he believed, Mark Richards believed, just weren't telling the truth. And that the prosecution, according to Mark Richards, Kyle Rittenhouse's defense, wanted to win the case, not the truth. What do you say about that?
That might have won him the case. Frankly, I believe that any lawyer, whatever position you take, your credibility is at stake. Because, again, you're trying to convince a jury to reach a result that you suggested that they reach. If the prosecutor put up witnesses who were clearly lying or could be essentially impeached based on prior statements and they testify to something different at trial, that's a mistake of the prosecutor. I think it's also a problem if the prosecutor switches tack in terms of their theory of the case. As Mr. Richards indicated, if there was prior testimony that one of the victims was shot from behind and the evidence turns out that that was not the case, that impacts that lawyer's credibility. And the jury, who must decide essentially who they believe, the lawyers and what the lawyers say factor into that in terms of whether a jury finds them to be credible. So I can understand Mr. Richards being personally offended, particularly if he knows these lawyers, but from the 1,000-yard view here, that worked for him because obviously he reached the result that he intended to reach for his client.
And Tony, Mark Richards was also asked this question by a reporter there, what he thought what was the pivotal moment in his defense in the trial that made a difference, right, for his client. He had a comment that said it was firing the other lawyers, but I do want to ask you about the court proceedings itself. What do you think was a pivotal moment for the defense?
I think it was the defendant's testimony. And there's been much criticism, of course, and opinions about whether those are crocodile tears or not on behalf of Mr. Rittenhouse, whether he was sincere in his testimony. But the jury believed that he was sincere. The jury believed that the government had not proven their case. So at the end of the day, a trial is about everything until the defendant hits the stand. When the defendant testifies, everyone's attention is off of everything else that happens. And if that defendant makes a misstep or engaged in a misstep during his testimony, that case is lost. So the pivotal part of this case was the Rittenhouse testimony. And the fact was accepted by those jurors making a decision about his freedom. And they bought it and they believed it. That was the crucial piece of this case.
And we're looking at that video of Kyle Rittenhouse testifying. This is when he became overwhelmed with emotion. The judge stopped this testimony for about 10 minutes, allowing Rittenhouse to compose himself before it continued. Anthony Huber, his family, his parents released a statement today, Tony, talking about justice will be served in regards to a civil case, we assume. The question for you, what do you think is next for Kyle Rittenhouse in court? We talked to Gil a little bit about this as well, but do you see more cases, obviously not criminal cases because those are done here in regards to Kyle Rittenhouse, but do you anticipate civil cases coming next?
I do. That's typical with these sort of actions and behavior. I am interested as to, how any plaintiff intends to be paid if they're successful in a lawsuit. If they're suing Mr. Rittenhouse, I understand that there are funds available based on the fundraising and some outside groups supporting the defense in this case. So I'd be interested to see what would actually happen here in terms of a civil outcome, understanding that the burden of proof in a civil case is different from the burden of proof in a criminal case. In a criminal case, of course, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the government reached that here according to the jury. and the defendant was found not guilty. However, the standard is preponderance of the evidence in a civil case, and they don't have to find that the defendant acted, well, in fact, they don't have to find defendant's actions equal to what the government needed to prove here in order for the defendant to be liable in a civil case. So there's the issue of liability. If he's liable by a civil jury, then how much would the plaintiff receive in a verdict or a judgment, and who would then pay that, if it's even payable or collectible? So it will be interesting to me what happens in that piece of the case. In terms of Mr. Rittenhouse, I would hope that his lawyer's correct. I would hope that Mr. Rittenhouse would live his life under radar. I am not suggesting anything about Mr. Rittenhouse. I am suggesting, however, that he could be used as a symbol in a very negative way by those groups or people who are interested in seeing this as some sort of victory. I compare it to the defendant in the Trayvon Martin case, George Zimmerman. Now, again, those were different cases. But if you, when Mr. Zimmerman was acquitted in that case down in Florida so many years ago, he was then popping up on every sort of extremist television site or website or making his own statements, and made to be a hero by those people who supported his acquittal. And he bathed in that for years and probably still does. And frankly, that sort of thing could be possible for Kyle Rittenhouse if, in fact, organizations wanted to use him as a symbol. I hope that he will resist that temptation and appreciate the fortune that he finds himself having been found not guilty, and becomes a nurse and decides to help people and move on with his life.
Yeah, Mark Richards, his lead attorney, defense attorney, did say that in answering one of the reporter's questions, what happens to Kyle right now, his answer was, I hope he stays low profile. Sounds like you would share the same advice and same opinion. Tony, I'll bring you back a little bit because you were talking about the testimony of Kyle Rittenhouse as being a pivotal moment for that defense. I'm curious, as a defense attorney, obviously you went through your line of questioning. There was a mock trial that they did, putting Kyle Rittenhouse up there with a mock jury. So you come in with your line of questioning. Are you also judging and watching how the jurors are reacting to some of what is being said by your client who's now on the stand, and then shifting your questioning?
Yes and no. You know, there could be some reaction by a juror or two based on particular testimony given or words used by a witness who testifies at trial, particularly the defendant. Obviously, in this case, Mr. Rittenhouse was defendant. However, I think it's impossible to then make an assumption of what that reaction would mean. It's not likely that, in this case, all 18 of those people who could have potentially been the jury deciding, or been whittled down to the 12 deciding the case, to frankly focus on any of those 18 reactions to any piece of that questioning, I think would be a distraction. I think the defense had a plan. They had to execute that plan relative to Mr. Rittenhouse's testimony. And I think that would be the focus, not focusing on any particular reactions of a jury, because, again, you don't know what the reaction means, if there's any reaction. So I think that would be, frankly, irresponsible way to proceed as a defense attorney. You have to prepare, have a plan, as clearly Mr. did, and execute that and frankly, hope for the best.
Tony, I also want to ask you about the makeup of the jury. 7 women, 5 men, 1 person, only 1 person of color. Some people have made a point of that it was only 1 person of color on that jury. What is your take on that?
Well, first of all, we don't know, when we say persons of color, that can be inclusive of a lot of different racial groups. So at this point, we still don't know if that was an African-American person who was the person of color on that jury. This case is an interesting case because both the defendant and the deceased and the one living victim in the case are all white. But it is a case about race because it's based on the non-charging of the officer who shot Jacob Blake. So this is obviously a racial element to this case, and at the core of this case is frankly about race, in my view. However, as to the composition of the jury, I think that it would be more important that the jury have greater diversity if the parties in the case were diverse, at least in terms of their race. That's what I believe. Does it matter that there was only one person of color on the jury? You bet. Because I think that with juries, they're deliberating and bringing perspectives. And everyone's perspective is based on their own background, based on their own experiences. And I think that people of color have experiences that are different from white people. It's simply a fact. So when there is only one voice in that room who may have had a unique experience based on their race, I think it certainly provides a different dynamic when a jury is deliberating a case. Now, we'll be clear, we weren't in that room, so we can't make assumptions about, how impactful or not impactful race was in that room. But I think objectively, and I think common sense allows us to conclude that the more perspectives we have, the different that deliberation would have proceeded.
We have not heard from any of the jurors, Tony. Remains to be seen whether any will come forward and speak. Does the prosecution, do they review what they did and think what would be done differently? And if so, what do you think would be? What do you think perhaps the state could have done differently?
Well, I've never been a prosecutor and never will be. And so my perspective is, I guess it would be a bit different from someone who is a prosecutor or would be an ex-prosecutor, but I would say their story and their presentation was convoluted. As we indicated earlier, or as Mr. Richards indicated earlier, they switched kind of theories in terms of how they proceeded. Again, I think consistency is the hallmark of a good prosecution. Being consistent and being dispassionate relative to wins or losses. I think that a prosecutor who clearly is simply seeking the truth and a conclusion based on the truth has put together a better case than a prosecutor who appears to be all over the place. And in some instances here, it appeared that those prosecutors were all over the place. I thought that the closing argument, particularly the second portion of the government's closing argument, because again, as prosecutors, they get both opening, close, and then a rebuttal. So they get two bites at the apple for closing argument. I thought that wrap-up was outstanding. However, everything leading to that point I thought was inconsistent and convoluted, and I didn't think that it helped that the ousting between the judge and the prosecutor in certain instances in this case. I don't think that helped the prosecution at all.
Jousting is probably a really good word that you just used. We did witness quite a bit of that. And again, just to let everybody know, happened outside the presence of the jury. So they didn't witness that. Let me ask you a little bit about the jurors, because the judge made a point. The verdict was read. Of course, we didn't see the jurors. The camera was on the judge. When the judge talked to the jurors and saying that it is entirely up to you if you want to speak to the media. You can. You don't have to. He really stressed that point. Just your opinion. Do you think in this case, would you anticipate one of the jurors, a group of jurors, to eventually talk about this?
Absolutely. We have not had a case with this level of attention in this country where there has not been a book written by a juror, or there hasn't been an appearance within weeks by a jury or jurors. And frankly, that is not a criticism of any juror who decides to proceed in that fashion. They have a right to do so. We saw that with jurors from the George Floyd case, not the George Floyd case, rather the officer who was convicted in the George Floyd matter. So we did see, obviously, some commentary by jurors days after they had reached their verdict in that case. So I would expect that would happen here. And let's hope that whatever they indicate is helpful. And when I say helpful, I think it's dangerous to add fuel to any fire that may be brewing in Kenosha amongst those folk who are dissatisfied with this verdict, or even those people who are satisfied with the verdict and may use that as an excuse to celebrate in a way that may lead to some sort of unrest. So I'm hopeful that jurors who will be listened to if commentary will be responsible with their commentary, and that it doesn't add fuel to any fires that are brewing at this point.
Defense attorney Tony Thetford, to be able to dip into your legal mind is greatly appreciated. Thank you for spending some time with us and talking to the defense team and just allowing us to learn some things from to have you and Gil with us today has just been a great resource. So Tony, thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Our team coverage is going to continue here because we haven't visited what's happening outside the courthouse here in a few minutes.
Yeah, so Mark Rivera and Liz Nagy have been out there for us all afternoon. So we're going to bring in Mark right now and give us a sense of what is happening there right now outside the Kenosha County Courthouse. Mark.
Judy and Rob, it has quite a bit since the verdict was read. We did see a few protesters, very small, 6 or 7 of them, walking and protesting the verdict, saying that the criminal justice system is broken. But right now, much of the supporters for both sides, Kyle Rittenhouse and those that wanted him to be convicted, have dispersed from the area. Right now, there are only a few people still on the court steps. Many media are here as well. We did see a woman who had a medical emergency just a few minutes ago, about half an hour ago, I should say. And in the last few minutes, we have seen some shouting matches as well between 1 or 2 people, but largely a very calm response here and not much else happening, especially right outside of the courthouse, even after this verdict. Back to you.
Mark Rivera outside the courthouse since this verdict was read, along with Liz. Appreciate you giving us an update. We mentioned earlier President Biden had spoke about this.
And now we have his reaction. We can play you.
You watched the trial, so
by your past comment equating him to white supremacy?
Well, look, I stand by what the jury has concluded. The jury system works. You have to be black.
That was the president saying he did not watch the trial, and then a reporter followed up. He had said that he believed Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist. He did not answer that question there, but said we need to stand by what the jury has decided today.
A lot happening here this afternoon. Let's bring back Liz Nagy, who has been covering the trial for us from the very beginning, watching the crowds out there, of course, on the steps, watching family members waiting for this verdict all these days. Liz.
Judy, Kyle Rittenhouse's case played out over 15 days here in the Kenosha County Courthouse, just a few blocks from where everything they were arguing over began in August of 2020. And after 15 days, 3.5 of those days, jury deliberations, 7 women and 5 men decided that Kyle Rittenhouse would be acquitted, found not guilty on all 5 criminal charges brought against him. That included reckless homicide, intentional homicide, and attempted homicide. The 3 people he shot here during protests after the police shooting of Jacob Blake last summer. Now, the family of Anthony Huber, his great aunt and his girlfriend, in court every day, as was Kyle Rittenhouse's family. There was a bitterly divided crowd when this trial began, and that bitterly divided crowd is still out here. Those emotions are not going to go away. But people in Kenosha seem to have a sense of relief that this trial is now over. If they are not happy with the verdict, that, they say, is just going to have to play out throughout the system over the next few weeks, months, and years. But the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse has now concluded, and you heard from Mark Richards, Kyle Rittenhouse's defense attorney. At least from him, there's a sense of relief there as well.
And Liz, I know you have spoken to some family members this whole process. Today, we really haven't seen them on camera reacting to the verdict.
We had Anthony Huber's great aunt walked out of court earlier today, as did Anthony Huber's girlfriend, but we have not really seen or heard from anyone else other than that. I did speak with Anthony Huber's great aunt yesterday, who had also taken the stand at one point, and I asked her if she believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was going to get convicted of anything. At the time, she said she did not have great confidence. She said she didn't know anything about the jurors that were sitting on the case. She knows a lot about Kenosha, and her view view, the town is pretty divided bitterly, 50-50. She was not surprised that those jury deliberations dragged on, and she said no matter what the outcome of this was, none of that was going to bring Anthony Huber back, and she said for her that was the most profound loss in all of this.
And Justin Blake, Jacob Blake's uncle, many of the people who disagree, strongly disagree with this result, you said, have they left the courthouse?
Has Justin Blake left the courthouse? Is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
It's difficult to tell. We've not seen Justin Blake walk, but he's the only person who's been out here every single day, all 15 days of this trial. So it may be that he's the very last person to leave the courthouse steps later on today. He has been protesting. He did not want to see Kyle Rittenhouse acquitted on any of these charges. He said he wanted Kyle Rittenhouse to be found guilty on all of the charges, but he did say he was going to urge and peaceful protests, people marching in the street perhaps, but nothing we saw last August, no matter what the outcome of this case is going to be. So Justin Blake may well still be in the middle of that crowd. He said our one's going to continue to host events and marches here in Kenosha, trying to push for change.
All right, Liz Nakey again has been on this case for us from the very beginning. Thank you so much, Liz. It has been now just about 2 hours since this verdict was read after the jury came back into the courtroom after 3 full days of deliberations. Let's bring you that moment right now as the verdict was being read.
Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, mail, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, H. Royce, we the jury find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
You see how collapsing back down to the desk and then hugs his attorney, Kyle Rittenhouse, not guilty of all charges. We're glad you're with us as we watch this unfold live with you. And there's a lot to get through, and so we're going to work on coverage at 4 p.m. We're going to join General Hospital in progress here. There will also be a rebroadcast in its entirety overnight tonight, and that is scheduled for 12:05. There's the information on your screen. It will air in its entirety at 12:10, and we're going to join it in process here. Now we've got to get our team to gather more details for you, and we'll provide a full newscast at 4.
Yeah, thank you for joining us right now. We'll see you at 4.
This has been a special report from ABC 7 Eyewitness News. We now return to our regular program schedule.